In the 1830s in Britain, statistics was the new science of the day. There was a boom in collecting data. The terrifying cholera epidemic of 1832, during which over 20,000 people died, drew the attention of investigators to one particular area: public health. In March 1840, a committee of the House of Commons began an inquiry into the health of towns. As the witnesses gave evidence, a picture began to emerge.
You are a physician living at Liverpool.
I am.
You are generally acquainted with the state of the dwellings of the working classes.
Yes, I've made an estimate of inhabited cellars at the present time. I think 8,000 would not be an overestimate.
Do these cellars contain more than one family?
Oh, yes, frequently 2 or 3 or more families. 6 years ago, I counted the number of courts. At that time, there were considerably more than 2,000. I estimate now there are 2,400. I have a diagram to explain the structure of the courts. The great majority have only one communication with the street, through a narrow archway 3 feet wide. The width between the 2 rows of houses varies from perhaps 9 to 15 feet. At the far end, there are generally 1 or 2 privies with an ash pit in between. They are in an abominable state of filth. And in some instances, the inhabitants of the whole street make use of the privies, having none of their own.
What is the average population of these courts?
I think the average would be 6 or 7 inhabitants to each house. That would make 36, or rather more, in each court.
Dr. William Duncan's evidence revealed the overcrowded living conditions of the working population in Liverpool. James Riddle Wood provided information on the sanitary condition of the town.
What is the state of the drains?
Chiefly surface drainage. In consequence of that, the smell in the cellars is most offensive. And many persons have stated that they're obliged in the night to quit their cellars on account of the offensive gas that comes into them.
He was concerned about the smell because most people believed a gas, miasma, spread disease.
I have noticed decayed vegetables, the offal of fish and other vegetable and animal substances polluting the atmosphere.
With regard to cleansing and sewerage, what is the state of that in Manchester?
Decidedly bad.
Injurious to the health of the inhabitants, in your opinion?
Yes. I had the opportunity of observing that. During the whole time the cholera prevailed, I was in the habit of visiting different neighborhoods, and I could predict pretty well beforehand where it would prevail to the greatest extent.
There were serious problems in every town, with the river in Leeds.
It receives all the foul matter from the various sewers.
Consequently, the water which is used by the inhabitants is of a very impure description, is it not?
Decidedly.
With a shortage of privies in Glasgow.
Do the inhabitants of several houses have to use one privy?
There is no privy. The excrement is flung out.
The report of the Select Committee on the Health of Towns catalogued a horror story of overcrowding, filth, disease and death. Why had living conditions in towns become so unhealthy? What happened in Preston is a good example. The town grew rapidly after 1800. In the 1801 census, the population was just under 12,000. By 1851, it was nearly 70,000. The existing housing became overcrowded as people moved to the town for work and the population grew. An 1840s report on Preston by Reverend John Clay recorded 84 cases of 4 people sleeping in the same bed, 28 cases of 5. Like all towns of the time, Preston was a walking town. The houses of the working population were concentrated in streets around the mills, as this Ordnance Survey map shows. People had to live near to walk to work. There was no other way to get there. In these streets, the lavatories were privies in the backyards. Excrement dropped down from the privy into a pit below where it was covered with ash. Night soil, as it was called, was removed by scavengers. In Preston, 12 of these were employed to empty privies used by nearly 70,000 people. Old houses or new, it was no different. Reverend Clay noted,
"The new streets in Preston have been planned and built without any attention to drainage and sewerage."
A movement to improve towns was led by civil servant Edwin Chadwick. In the 1830s, he had investigated the Poor Law and noticed how often poor health or the death of the wage earner from disease caused poverty. He argued that bad sanitation led to disease, and disease led to poverty, so improving public health would cut the cost of supporting the poor. His campaign to improve public health led to the passing in 1848 of a Public Health Act. This act gave local authorities the power to establish boards of health to manage sewage, the water supply, and rubbish disposal. With this act, central government made it clear to local authorities that it was their responsibility to do something about public health. Did they? In the summer of 1858, the work of the House of Commons was severely disrupted. The cause of the disruption was first commented on by John Brady MP on June the 11th.
I wish to put a question to the noble lord, the Chief Commissioner of Works, with regard to the state of the River Thames. It is a notorious fact that honourable gentlemen sitting in the committee rooms and in the library are utterly unable to remain there in consequence of the stench which arises from the river.
The great stink had arrived, and it was still there a week later when R.D. Mangles, MP for Guildford, got up to speak.
I have been told that the only plan before the Metropolitan Board of Works at the present moment for the abatement of the dreadful nuisance is one for delivering the whole sewage of London into the middle of the Thames instead of the sides of the river. And that scheme seemed to exhaust the wisdom of the body. One of the board members, a Mr. Wright, suggests that the board, on a day to be agreed upon, inspect the river in a steamboat hired for the purpose with a view to ascertain its condition, at a time when rational men could have no doubt upon that subject whatsoever. If cholera were to visit the metropolis with the river in its present state, the mortality will be something dreadful, and a great responsibility would rest upon the legislature. Parliament has handed the whole matter over to the Metropolitan Board of Works, and nothing has been done.
10 years after the 1848 Public Health Act, the condition of the Thames was not better. It was worse. Why did the 1848 Public Health Act have so little effect? The Act, for the most part, did not tell local authorities what to do about public health. It made recommendations. It recommended they appoint a doctor as a medical officer to monitor public health. In Preston, they didn't. In 1848, there was still little scientific understanding of disease. A connection between squalid living conditions and disease was suspected, as this cartoon shows. The customers of the Southwark Waterworks Company crowd beside the polluted Thames begging for clean water. But it was another 20 years before Louis Pasteur proved the existence of germs and how they were transmitted. Preston did appoint a surveyor, Henry Rigg, to design and build sewers. In 1853 he presented these plans. Years of argument followed over the type of bricks to use, who should make them, the cost. Building a sewer system was physically difficult and expensive, and the money was to come from the rates paid by local people. There was an argument about how much water the sewer system needed. To solve this problem, the local authority bought the privately owned Preston Waterworks Company. Delayed by engineering difficulties, cost and private interests, the Preston sewer system was not completed until 1865. Everywhere, tackling public health was a difficult task, but it was tackled, slowly and patchily. The great stink got far enough up the noses of politicians to get action in London. On August 2nd, 1858, an Act of Parliament was passed which allowed the London Metropolitan Board of Works to borrow £3 million to begin work on a sewage system for London. But many other local authorities, faced with a difficult and expensive task, did little. These were finally forced to act in 1875, when another Public Health Act told them they must take responsibility for the disposal of rubbish and sewage and provide a clean water supply. Cleaning up the towns did improve the population's health. In the 1850s, the national death rate was 22 in 1,000. By the 1880s, it was 19 in 1,000, but it was still high. Improving sanitation and the water supply only partly dealt with the causes of disease.
I was asked to investigate the case of a young collier, his wife and 2 children. I soon found the house, or rather dwelling. There were 2 rooms, one up and one downstairs. A door in the room below leading to the stair. All the furniture they possessed was in the room below. A bed, a chair, a rickety chest of drawers, and a small round 3-legged table. Not a vestige of comfort. There was no fire, only a handful of burnt-out cinders and ash in the grate. A man of about 25 sat beside it. In the bed was a young woman, about 23. She was white and wan, and looked dazed. She was holding a week-old baby to her empty breast. Over her cotton nightie was her husband's waistcoat. Over her knees his coat. These were the only coverings of any warmth. It was so pitiful I did not know what to say, except, "I've come to help you, but I thought there were 2 children." "There was 3 days ago," the woman said. "Show her, Jem." The man got up heavily and went and opened the bottom drawer of the rickety chest. There lay a little dead child, about 2 or 3 years old, her tiny hands folded on her breast over her tiny striped nightie, and a look of infinite calm and pathos on her little worn face. It seemed to illuminate that dingy drawer. "Oh," I gasped, "why is she here?" The man said, "We'll be waiting for the parish to come and bury her." The mother said, couldn't find it in her heart to put her upstairs alone in an empty room. I stood still, the tears pouring down my cheeks and sob choking me. But the parents shed not a tear, nor said a word, except when Jem closed the drawer. He said, "She were a nice little lass, she were."
Mrs. John Brown did social work with poor families in Burnley. In the second half of the 19th century, a large number of the population, as she saw, still lived and died in conditions of squalor and poverty. In the 1880s, a businessman, Charles Booth, suspecting that reports of poverty were exaggerated, surveyed the East End of London. He was shocked by his own findings.
In the population under review, the 100,000 very poor are at all times ill-nourished and poorly clad. From day to day and from hand to mouth, they get by, sometimes suffering, sometimes helped. Their whole income is absorbed by necessary expenditure. It is only by evading the payment of rent or going short of food that clothes and other household goods can be bought. This is the poorest case on my list, but it is typical of a great many others. The man is a casual dock labourer, aged 38, in poor health. His wife of 43 suffers from tuberculosis. The son, of 18, who earns 8 shillings regular wage as a carman's boy, and 2 girls of 8 and 6 complete the family. Practically no meat is bought. The food consists principally of bread, margarine, tea and sugar. The neighbouring clergy send soup 2 or 3 times a week. This diet is somewhat varied so as to bring in some fish, a bit of bacon and a few eggs, besides the charitable soup. These people are undoubtedly very poor.
Millions continue to suffer diseases like tuberculosis, which spread easily in overcrowding. As the reformer Octavia Hill saw, the living conditions of the poor had changed little.
About 4 years ago, I was put in possession of 3 houses in one of the worst courts in Marylebone. The houses were in a deplorable condition. plaster was dropping from the walls. A pail had been placed to catch the rain that fell through the roof. All the staircases were perfectly dark. The inhabitants had to wash clothes as well as to cook, eat and sleep in their small rooms.
Reverend Samuel Barnett compared the health of the rich and the poor.
What is it to the poor that it has been proved how cleanliness is the secret of health? They cannot have the latest sanitary appliances. They cannot take baths in their narrow homes or have constant change of clothing. Good news is the message of modern time, with its discoveries and its inventions. One class in the nation rejoices in the good news. The rich in England hear the message of science. The mother among the poor, in her joy that a son is born into the world, cannot look forward to his life. What is it to her that science has proved stronger than disease? Society is out of sorts, and the disease is that its most important member is ignorant of the good news. Miserable dwellings, ill-fed bodies, starvation and degradation are symptoms of this disease.
The late 19th century reformers highlighted the connection between poverty and disease. They campaigned for measures to tackle this health problem. Was action taken to improve the health of the poor? Seabohm Rowntree researched poverty in York as Charles Booth had in London. His 1901 report concluded that 25 to 30% of the town population of Britain still lived in poverty. Large numbers of the volunteers at the time of the Boer War were found to be suffering from tuberculosis and diseases of malnutrition, like rickets. These findings led to fears of a general physical decline among the people of Britain. A series of state-funded welfare measures were put in place. Education Acts in 1906 and 1907 introduced school meals and medical inspections into schools to be paid for out of the local rates. In 1911, a health scheme was introduced. Workers and employers were compelled to pay into a fund to which the state would add money from taxes. The fund was to pay for medical treatment, medicine and sickness benefit for those off work through illness. Some found the measures too limited. At a speech in 1909, the MP Keir Hardie called them
a sticking plaster to cover the disease that poverty causes.
Public health in the 19th century was a problem on a massive scale. Even after better sanitation and clean water were provided, there still remained a colossal problem of ill health caused by poverty. The first decade of the 20th century made just a start on measures to deal with this.